bringing more clouds and some heavy showers. We've already seen a few, but we're going to see more of them developing this afternoon as the heat really gets going, particularly over parts of the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast initially, but spreading into Wales and then later on into northern England. Southwest England also susceptible to some heavy downpours. Hit and miss, so not everywhere seeing them, far from it, but where they do occur, torrential rain, large hail likely. The highest temperatures today across northern England, North Wales, could get close to 30 Celsius. Mostly dry for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Quite a bit of cloud here, but some sunny spells coming through. And then through the evening, the chance of those thundery showers working further north. So we'll see more of them this evening over northern England, spreading into parts of Scotland. Some heavy rain likely here through the night. The downpours further south tending to ease. Quite a warm, quite a humid night. Quite a lot of cloud around as well, but misty in places. And generally a cloudier day on Friday with a continued risk of some showers. The overnight ones clearing away from northern Scotland, but we'll see more developing, I think, during tomorrow, particularly over the Midlands, southwest England, but also moving up into northeast England during the afternoon. Again, not everywhere seeing the downpours, but there will be some heavy ones around, the risk of hail and thunder. In the sunny spells, mid-20s across the east, but turning cooler further west with more persistent rain for Northern Ireland, moving in by the end of Friday. Wales and southwest England seeing some heavy rain for a time late on Friday as well. And that line of rain is a cold front which swings across all areas, tied into this area of low pressure, which will bring plenty of showers in western areas this weekend and a much cooler feel, with particularly across Northern Ireland, some gusty winds.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome to Thursday's edition of On the Money, where we're focused on the UK's cost of living crisis, helping you beat the squeeze. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour, we're talking about sky-high fuel bills, not those faced by households, which are high enough, but those faced by firms, which have risen even more over recent months as businesses have no protection from that Ofgem energy price cap. We're also covering the second day of this national rail strike and hearing from two former prison officers who've successfully helped hundreds and hundreds of ex-offenders to find long-term work on their release for prison. On the Money, after the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Liam, thank you. It's 1 minute past one. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Railway passengers are facing more disruption over the summer, with unions planning to ballot staff next week for another round of strikes. Tens of thousands of workers have walked off the job for the second time this week following a dispute over pay and conditions. More industrial action is planned for Saturday. Negotiations continue, but the RMT's Assistant General Secretary John Leach says the current offer needs to be improved.
I'm going in anticipation and hope that they're going to put a proper and decent offer on the table. But the thing is, let's talk about what is on the table. 2%, job insecurity, thousands of job cuts, ticket office closures, new contracts, fire and rehire. That's not on. They've got to have a complete reset. And more importantly, probably than anything else, the government have got to get behind the railway men and women of this country and resource and give the authority to the management to negotiate a fair deal.
Well, Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng says there is a fair offer on the table.
People who are striking, preventing kids from taking exams, preventing people from getting to work, should really actually look at what they're doing and actually, I think, come to some sort of reasonable arrangement. I don't think it's the case that the government has been unreasonable. I think the strikers are the ones who are being unreasonable.
The Prime Minister says he will stress the obvious merits of the government's Rwanda policy during a meeting with the Prince of Wales. They're both currently in the capital, Kigali, for a meeting of Commonwealth leaders. Prince Charles reportedly described the deportation of asylum seekers to the African country as appalling. Boris Johnson's promised to keep going, saying the policy doesn't break any laws. He's also expected to announce new trade deals and investment initiatives during his trip.
We're striking free trade agreements across the whole of the Commonwealth. We've done Australia, we've done New Zealand. We're going to do a deal with India by Diwali. We've signed free trade or economic partnerships with 33 of our Commonwealth friends so far, and through the Trans-Pacific Partnership, we're aiming for new deals with Malaysia and Brunei.
2 people have been charged with conspiring to arrange the travel of a child into the UK to harvest organs. A 60-year-old man and 55-year-old woman, both from Nigeria, have been remanded in custody. They're due to appear at Uxbridge Magistrates Court. The child has been taken into care. The Met Police is being reinvestigated over the way it handled its inquiry into serial killer Stephen Port's victims. Port murdered 4 young men in Barking, East London, and is serving a whole life sentence. A 2021 inquest found police failures probably contributed to the deaths of 3 of his victims. Scotland Yard has acknowledged the failings and says it will support the new inquiry. 2 British men who were captured by Russian forces in Ukraine are reportedly preparing to appeal their death sentences. Aidan Aslin, Sean Pinner and Moroccan national Brahim Sadoun were convicted by a Russian-backed court in the breakaway region of Donetsk. Sean Pinner's lawyer says if the appeal is dismissed, they'll request clemency. Meanwhile, the UK has announced a raft of new sanctions against Russia, which includes a ban on exporting jet fuel and British banknotes. In Turkey, the Foreign Secretary accused Moscow of weaponising hunger with its blockade of Ukrainian grain. Liz Truss said if issues aren't resolved within a month, the global impact will be huge. Afghan authorities are still struggling to reach a remote area after yesterday's earthquake, which killed at least 1,000 people. 1,500 others were injured as the 6.1 magnitude quake struck, destroying homes in the eastern part of the country. It's the deadliest earthquake to hit Afghanistan in 2 decades. The United Nations is calling for financial aid, urging world leaders to provide humanitarian support. And the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have viewed their first official joint portrait. It's on display at the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge and will be open to public viewings. It was painted by award-winning artist Jamie Corrith and commissioned last year as a gift for the people of Cambridgeshire. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. Let's return to Liam with On the Money.
And coming up on The Money today, Household utility bills have been spiralling in recent months as oil and gas prices have soared on global markets, and the Ofgem energy price cap has risen, doubling fuel bills for many. But businesses don't enjoy the protection even of that rising Ofgem cap. And for thousands of firms across the UK, fuel bills have risen by an even higher percentage than for cash-strapped families. What can firms do? We hear from one GB News viewer and business owner and ask the experts what are his options. Plus, it's day 2 of the national rail strike. We hear from GB News reporters across the country and assess the chances of an early settlement between the RM2 Rail Union and Network Rail. And each day on The Money features an in-depth Money Talks interview. Today we hear from 2 ex-prison officers who are determined to help ex-offenders secure good jobs on their release from prison.
Oh, you come into prison, you work hard in prison, you get on well with staff, you get on well with your peers. You go and work down a hot, sweaty kitchen on 12-hour shifts. You don't moan, you get up 6-7 days a week. Why can't you do that on the out? And the stock answer that were coming back was, have you ever tried getting a job with a record like mine, Val? And I'd say, well, actually, no. And then I'd actually witness them writing letters to 150, 200 companies. They'd write the letters, send them off, and not get one answer because they actually disclosed on the letter that they've got criminal convictions.
That's Steve Freer and Val Vavrosh, founders of the Tempus Novo employment agency for ex-prison convicts. We hear their incredible story and about the good work that they're doing later in the show. And as ever, I want your questions, opinions, ideas. What do you think of the issues raised in today's On The Money? Are you a business with a sky-high fuel bill that could send you off the rails? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. I'll read out some of your messages later in the show. So stay with us, because this is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and you're on The Money. Now, yesterday's On The Money featured a business owner from Kent called Mark Bridgen. He's the governor of the Dog at Wingham near Dover, a popular pub, restaurant and guest house. Mark contacted us at gbnews@gbviews.uk. I read his email, and so I called him up for a chat. Why? Because his email said the utility bill for his business, gas and electricity, had escalated from £35,000 a year to almost £100,000. And for a business that employs around 30 people and turns over around £1.5 million a year, a tripling of your utility bill to £100,000 a year wipes out a lot of your profits and could be terminal.
If our revenues continue to be under pressure and then our margin is completely gone, how long do we bankroll it in the hope of good times returning?
Mark Bridgen here on The Money yesterday, and after talking to Mark on the phone, I invited him to appear on The Money, and he confirmed these spiralling fuel costs could ultimately destroy his business. And what we heard yesterday is a reminder that while there's a cap on fuel bills for households, there's no such cap for firms. And that lack of a business energy price cap means thousands of firms are seriously suffering. Right across the country, in fact, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises in sectors from manufacturing to hospitality are struggling with price pressures. Data published yesterday revealed that producer price inflation, that's the cost of inputs bought by companies, including energy, to make the stuff that they then sell us. That producer price inflation was up almost 23% during the year to May, and that's a 45-year high. For months, On The Money's been highlighting cost pressures faced by businesses, not least their spiralling energy bills. And that's why we're asking today, should the household energy price cap extend to businesses too? Grown-up conversations with people who know their stuff. That's what we do here on The Money. And so I'm delighted to welcome to the show Kevin Wallace. He's another GB News viewer. He runs a farm in Rochester Down in Kent, and he's going to be telling us about his spiralling energy bills. We also have, to listen to him and respond, Callan Thompson. He's Managing Director at Business Energy Claims. Callan's been on the show many times before. This is what he does. He specialises in how businesses can deal with their sky-high energy bills. And also a friend of the show in the studio, Max King, columnist, of course, at Money Week. Great to see you, Max. So let's go to you first, Kevin. Thanks for your email. Thanks for getting in touch with me here at GB News. The floor is yours. Tell us about your energy bills and the potential impact they could have on your farm.
Good afternoon, Liam. Well, at the moment, we're paying about £80.35. I've done actually some research over the last 22 days, so from the beginning of the month up to last night. On the rate we're at the moment, with sort of daytime, nighttime and the daily charge, would have come out at £80.35 plus VAT. A few weeks ago, back in the end of May, our supplier came through to us and said, right, these will be your new rates. You can either have 12, 24, or 36 months. Now, if I would take the 24-month one, that would have then come in at £189.28 for those 22 days. So a rise of £108 plus VAT, so roughly £5 a day. That's bad enough, but it gets worse. This morning, just before lunch, I thought, well, I'll just check the figures on that. Looked up again. They put it up again as of this week. For the 22 days of what we've used would now be £207.46. So that's a rise of £127.11 on what we've been paying at the moment. And that's just for the 22 days of June. So that's £5.77 a day increase plus VAT. If we went for the 36-month one, that would be £206.49, so a rise of £126.14, or £5.73 per day plus VAT. It's just getting stupid, this.
Kevin, these are absolutely debilitating numbers. You're talking about 22-day energy periods. I've just done some maths listening to you. If you lock in for 1 year, your fuel bill goes up by 58%. If you lock in for 2 years, it goes up by 61%. How big a share of your total cost base is energy? For people listening on the radio, we can see that you're in a greenhouse there, a kind of arboretum. You're obviously producing crops, fruit and veg that needs to be heated in order to grow in our climate. Are these numbers potentially ruinous for you, Kevin, with the best will in the world?
It's certainly not going to help. Growing is a major problem, whatever you're doing. You're either fighting the weather, insects, floods like we had earlier on in the year. So you name it, we're up against it. Give you an example. Behind me are roughly 1,200 tomato plants. Now, we start producing round about the beginning of July. Last year, after 2 or 3 weeks in, the whole crop was lost by blight. That's just an airborne sort of fungus that affected gardeners and allotments in the area, nothing you can do about it. So we lost all of our trade on that. This year, back in February, we suddenly found, first time in 55 years, we were flooded. Our bottom field was probably about 10, 12 foot deep in water. My main sort of cultivation and mowing machine was underwater. That's been sent off to the manufacturers. They came back to me and said, can't do anything with the engine. We can get a new engine, but it'll be 12 months delivery on it.
Yeah.
So basically this year, I'm not growing anything much outside. So it's not going to help, let's put it that way.
And of course, Kevin, you are a cultivator. You're buying fertiliser. Fertiliser prices have gone through the roof. To get your product to market, you've got to stick it on a truck, which is generally going to be run by diesel. Your diesel prices have gone up, etc., etc., etc. A difficult time for you. Callan Thompson, you've been listening to Kevin Wallace. He's run his farm for a long time. He's a very smart, very experienced bloke. And his business is under threat, serious threat, from these sky-high energy costs. He's just been quoted a 61% rise in his energy costs if he locks in for 2 years. Why isn't there an energy price cap for firms as well as households?
Yeah, well, I honestly can't answer that one. And, we feel quite strongly about this, and it's comments that I've made before that there really ought to be. I mean, if you look at it relative to the price cap for domestic users, for electricity, you're looking at around 17p per kilowatt hour, and for gas around 7p. And I don't know exactly how that sort of looks with Kevin, but to put it into perspective, and I could quote many examples, but we've got a property business that we act for who have gone from sort of 16.58p, so it's in and around the existing sort of price cap for sort of domestic users at home, and they're going up to 52.6p per kilowatt hour. So it's all pretty consistent. Another sort of threefold increase. They were paying £400 per month. They're going to be increased to £1,100 per month. So that's an increase of over £8,000 per year, and that has to be compensated for from somewhere. So I think it's just a question of when that happens. When are they going to step in? And hopefully for all of us, it's going to be before it's too late, because there's already a number of clients that we're acting for who are very, very close to going into administration as a result of this sort of crisis.
At the very least, Callum, I know it's difficult, and you've been on my show before. I know your heart's absolutely in the right place, but at the very least, if I tell you that Kevin Wallace is facing quotes of his monthly energy unit going up from about 80 quid to 189 quid a month on a 1-year fixed basis, or 80 quid to 207 quid a month on a 2-year fix, you can at least reassure him he isn't being singled out. He's not being particularly ripped off. These are the kind of quotes that businesses are getting across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I realise that it offers very little consolation to Kevin, but there are many, many, many thousands of examples of this. I mean, there are some businesses that are sitting in quite a fortunate position, which is that they've fixed in their energy deal beyond the sort of increases that we've seen over the last few months, and they're sitting there quite comfortably as it stands. But faced with the prospect of enormous price increases, but there are also a very large number who aren't in that position, who are either negotiating their contracts now or have negotiated them in the last sort of few months. And, the other thing that we're finding as well is that there are new businesses or people who are looking to start new businesses who are fazed by it and actually put off by the idea. So, again, I could quote many examples, but, we're acting for a small Greek restaurant, and again, similar sort of rates. Gas, we're seeing more of an increase than we are electricity. So they're looking at sort of rates of 16p, where previously it was sort of 2 to 3p. Bearing in mind the price cap for domestic is around 7p. And, they've been fortunate to be able to set their business up. But I know that there'll be examples of businesses out there or prospective business owners who are sort of put off by the idea. So, no, certainly Kevin isn't isolated, unfortunately.
And of course, we need these business owners. We need entrepreneurs like Kevin to get the economy moving. Max King, you've been listening to that. Two decent, honest people who know their stuff telling you about the situation. Do you think there should be an energy price cap for business? I know you're broadly a free marketeer, but there's clearly an issue here.
I don't think it would be necessary if everybody was doing the right thing. And it's interesting that Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, thinks that by keeping interest rates low, he's helping businesses. And what that has resulted in, of course, is a weakening sterling against the dollar, and so that's pushed up energy prices.
Because it pushes up the price of all imports, right?
Exactly, and so he's not helping business at all, quite the opposite. Actually, higher interest rates would help sterling and would underpin energy prices. The other thing, too, which is important to note, is that if you look at the oil price, and I don't know about gas prices, but the oil price is down $10 a barrel in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
The oil future a year out is $10 lower.
Yeah. And suggesting prices are coming down.
And 2 years out, it's $20 lower. And that suggests very strongly that prices are coming down. So to my mind, it makes no sense to lock in prices for 1 year or 2 year.
So you actually think the Ofgem energy price cap and energy prices in general this autumn could actually come down slightly, Max? You're very much a sort of market-driven person. You're a former fund manager. This is what you do.
I think by the time that they actually bring the new cap in, which will be higher, actually prices will probably will be falling. So I think I'm not sure anyone really needs these price caps, an increased price cap.
Very interesting. Well, Kevin, there you have it. Really grateful to you for appearing on our show. Kevin Wallace there is a farmer in Rochester in Kent, and also Callum Thompson, who's Managing Director of Business Energy Claims. Max King is staying with us. But the conclusion from that seems to be, yes, a lack of an energy price cap is really hurting a lot of businesses, but if we put one on now, it may actually be counterproductive, because it could be that by the autumn, energy prices are actually falling. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. After the break, we'll be carrying on our discussion, talking about those rail strikes wreaking havoc across the UK, as the RMT union demands a pay increase that reflects inflation. But is the industrial action fair on ordinary people? Let me know. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk and stay with us, because you're on the money.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money. It's the second day of this rail strike as the RMT union has walked out once again. Over 40,000 staff are protesting. They want more pay, better working conditions, and a guarantee that there'll be no future compulsory redundancies. They're fighting for a pay rise in line, they say, with inflation of around 10%. And the RMT has rejected the 3% pay offer put forward by Network Rail. On Tuesday, it was a double whammy as half the entire rail network was closed due to strikes and the London Underground was forced to grind to a halt as well. And today, travellers face another day of national rail strikes, with part of Wales and Scotland becoming completely impossible to travel to by train, so you have to use the car. Talks broke down again last night, with the RMT accusing the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, of, quote, wrecking negotiations, although Grant Shapps denies this. I'm still with Max King, columnist at Money Week, and joining us is Tony Lodge, Energy and Infrastructure Research Fellow at the Centre for Policy Studies. Tony, you've written a lot over the years about the future of the rail industry. We've been focused, haven't we, on the politics of the strike action, on the implications for travellers up and down the country, not least here in the capital with that tube strike. What's the bigger picture here? The structure of our railways, particularly the structure of our railways post-COVID. The vexed question of who actually pays for the railways.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head. The real elephant in the room now is that we need a complete review of the finances of the railway, and the Treasury needs to take a lead. The railway industry shrunk by 77% during COVID when Boris Johnson told us to work from home.
The passenger numbers.
Passenger numbers, but more importantly, 75% of railway passenger journeys are in the home county's London commuter market, and that is still on its knees before these strikes. The 5-day peak commuter market is, we think, about 20% of where it was, and that was in a very, very fragile recovery. These strikes will further hurt that, and that used to reward the Treasury with a significant premium. The intercity market, the leisure market, was actually doing rather well. It was coming back quite quickly. That's been completely...
And the government was encouraging it, wasn't it?
It was.
Certain free tickets, trying to encourage staycations and all the rest of it.
And that's been completely kneecapped. The whole, how can you really rely on an advanced, pre-booked advanced ticket for July the 16th, for example, when there's a very good chance we'll be on strike again? So that, sadly, has come off again. So we now have to look at a complete review of rail's finances going forward, because the situation as we come out of this, when we come out of this, will be a very, very big hole in rail finances.
Max, do you think the media are over-egging these rail strikes? Of course, when you've only got 20% of services working, it does affect certain people. But the railway is used mostly by sort of professional, middle-class people. Of course, that's a cliche. Of course, lots of varying people from across the economic spectrum, if you like, use the railway. But, you know, I deliberately stressed yesterday here on The Money that there have been bus strikes going on. Up in Yorkshire for the last 16 days of strike action. Up in the north east, Arriva bus drivers have just agreed to walk out. Are we overstressing this rail strike?
Well, I think so, because as we've just heard, that railways are primarily used in the southeast, and they have been used by the commuters, and commuters have gone away. So the passenger numbers have not recovered. I think they're down by a third from the pre-COVID, and revenues down by a half. And I think any worker, railway workers among them, are entitled to take any legally permissible action to try and defend their standards of living. But they have to be aware of the consequences of that action. I mean, I don't think they should be having regard to the public interest. You don't turn up to work as a railway worker to have regard to the broader public interest. But they have to be aware that actually the railways have returned to the downward spiral we saw under the previous phase of a nationalisation in the 70s and 80s, declining services, cut services, strikes, and that, of course, that means that they'll have to hike up rail fares, and then the spiral will go on downwards. So, it's not obvious to me that actually the railways have a long-term future unless they can resolve the issues, get passengers back on the railways, and they can and resolve the obvious overmanning which has been encouraged by Network Rail for the last 20 years.
Do you agree with that, Tony? Because on the other hand, you could paint a picture of the railways, there could be a renaissance if we actually built decent commuter links between, the northern cities. If we built, Northern Powerhouse Rail, or HS3, as it's sometimes called, if we actually provided rail services that were reliable and people wanted to use.
Yeah, there's some truth in that, Liam, without doubt. High Speed 3, as it became known, would have speeded up journeys between Manchester and Leeds, which is ridiculous at the moment. It still remains bad, even with some new rolling stock.
Try getting from Leeds to Newcastle.
Indeed, exactly.
Crikey.
The Transpennine route. The one important thing here, which is going to be absolutely critical, is the extent to which, and it's an overused word, modernisation leads to the most advanced technical solution for digital ticketing after this is over. And if that doesn't come about, and it will have to come about, and they talk about they're going to close ticket offices, why should you have to go to a ticket office in a railway station to book a ticket?
You don't.
The fundamental point is that we should have moved on to a fundamental digital technological offering a long time ago. And this should be...
Are we lagging other countries in this regard?
I don't honestly necessarily think it's... TGV, in fairness, in France is very advanced. But what we need to have, and we've seen them popping up around London, these Amazon Fresh stores, where you go in, you download the app, you go around and shop, and then you walk out without going anywhere near a till. That is the future of rail digital ticketing. And by the way, when you do that, you are sold the cheapest ticket available at that time. This is all to be had. It's all to be done.
Are the rail unions stopping that from happening? I see the government's been placing certain stories in the papers about, 10 blokes needed to change a light switch, walking in allowances, sort of 1970s style trade union practices deliberately restricting efficiency.
This may sound like an old-fashioned concept, but I think the Secretary of State, if he hasn't already done it, needs to write to every single rail worker in Britain. Because most of the rail workers in Britain, though they wouldn't admit it, can see what's going on around them. They know their customers are either not coming back or are hesitating from coming back. Now, if you are a railway worker, whether you are R&T, ASLEF or Unite, and you can see what's actually going on, you know that this cannot keep going on and on and on and on. And that's a story. I had a piece in the Telegraph the other week. It's a different sector, but that's where we had the Nottinghamshire miners knowing that if they didn't change as an industry, they were all going to be...
They're the ones who didn't follow Scargill, of course, unlike the Yorkshire miners and the NUM.
Correct.
Max, how's this going to play out? You're a pretty canny viewer of politics.
Well, I don't know about you, but I certainly haven't been inside a ticket office for 5 years, and probably for 10 years. And I've still got this abiding memory of horror about ticket offices. You know, you'd go along half an hour before your train was left to buy your ticket, and you'd find there was a queue a mile long because 3 out of 4 positions were closed. And the reason why the ticket was so slow is there was a significant number of elderly people who just turned up for a chat, didn't know where they wanted to go, or which route they wanted to go on, or what day they wanted to go on, and couldn't even find the money for it. And you always missed your train. So I am not going to a ticket office ever again, as far as I'm concerned.
Max King, cyber traveller himself, Max King of Money Week. Great to have you on the show, as ever, and indeed Tony Lodge at the Centre for Policy Studies. This debate will continue, and meanwhile, the strike action will go on. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. After the break, we'll be hearing from GB News reporters across the country on how those rail strikes are affecting people in their areas. And stay with me for today's Money Talks, because we meet the men helping former prisoners get back into employment. Steve Freer and Val Vavrosh, the co-founders of charity Tempus Novo, tell us of the difficulties they've had in rehabilitating ex-offenders, and they tell us about their successes. But first, it's the GB News headlines once more with Rhiannon Jones.
Liam, thank you. It's 1:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Some breaking news this hour. The Ministry of Defence has confirmed 2nd Lieutenant Max George of 5th Battalion, the Rifles, was killed during a training exercise on Salisbury Plain. He suffered serious head injuries after being involved in a collision with a Warrior armoured vehicle on Tuesday. His death is being investigated by police. Railway passengers are facing more disruption over the summer, with another union planning to ballot staff next week over potential strikes. Tens of thousands of workers have walked off the job for the second time this week following a dispute over pay and conditions. More industrial action is planned for Saturday. The Prime Minister says he'll stress the obvious merits of the government's Rwanda policy during a meeting with the Prince of Wales. They're both currently in the capital Kigali for a meeting of Commonwealth leaders. Prince Charles reportedly described the deportation of asylum seekers to the African country as appalling. Boris Johnson has promised to keep going, saying the policy doesn't break any laws. 2 people have been charged with conspiring to arrange the travel of a child into the UK to harvest organs. A 60-year-old man and 55-year-old woman, both from Nigeria, have been remanded in custody. They're due to appear at Uxbridge Magistrates Court. The child has been taken into care. The Met Police is being re-investigated over the way it handled its inquiry into serial killer Stephen Port's victims. It follows a 2021 inquest which found police failures probably contributed to the deaths of 3 of the 4 men. Scotland Yard has acknowledged the failings and says it will offer every support to the new inquiry. TV Online and DAB+ Radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.223 and 1.164 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,494.82 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast. Stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 1:37 here on GB News TV, DAB plus digital radio and online. You are on the money. We're discussing the biggest rail strike in a generation, with industrial reaction by the RMT Rail Union bringing the UK's rail network to its knees. Today, rail workers have walked out for a second time following Tuesday's strike in a bid to secure better working conditions and pay. And there's more travel nightmares to come, with strikes this weekend on Saturday and no sign of a resolution. We're now joined by GB News reporter Rosie Wright, who's in front of a picket line at London Euston Station. Rosie, you were there on Tuesday as well. How does it compare?
It's a pretty similar picture, I've got to say, Liam. The resolution is there, the determination is there. The people behind me on the picket line and the RMT are saying, we're not going to beg, we're going to negotiate for the very best deal we can for our workers. And we're not talking about train workers. Behind me, behind this picket line, we've got, for example, a caterer. One of them who said to me, look, I don't even earn $30,000 a year. I've got a family to look after. We haven't had a pay rise in 3 years. This is what we've got to do. It's a last resort. Earlier on this morning, there were representatives of the RMT. I was speaking to the Assistant Secretary General. They've been having talks with National Rail this morning in the building behind me. They came out about lunchtime, no word about how those talks went, but repeated claims. I have to be really clear here. They are going to fight and keep going, and threats of more strikes if they don't get what they want. And what do they want? About a 7% pay rise. Now, it looks like they're not going to get that. The rail companies so far have been pretty firm themselves. We can give you 3%. Let's talk. Let's get round the negotiating table and see what we can do. It looks like we're heading now towards another afternoon full of talks. If they can come to a conclusion, that might take out some of the disruption we'll see on Saturday. At this point, it looks unlikely, but we'll have to see how the day ends. One person said to me, look, it's like Brexit. We'll just keep negotiating until it's done. Meanwhile, while the action is happening outside of the station, it's very quiet inside Euston. You know, Britain's 6th busiest station normally, currently running only about 6 trains an hour. The people who are getting on trains are a little bit anxious because they don't have a seat reservation and they're desperate to get on the trains that are actually running. As you mentioned, Liam, currently the whole network running at about 20% of the capacity. That's inconveniencing loads of people. One guy, Tim, that I spoke to this morning, had missed his first day at work. He's working as a chef in the Peak District this afternoon. Oh, sorry, the Lake District. He couldn't get there in time. He spent the whole night sleeping outside Euston train station because when he arrived yesterday, sorry, the last train's already gone. The next one's going to be 8:30 this morning. So some disgruntled passengers, some quite anxious to get on trains, but more disgruntled are the people behind me.
Thank you, Rosie. GB News' Rosie Wright there outside the Network Rail headquarters where those negotiations are happening at Euston Station. And now we're joined by Anna Riley. She's our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, of course. She's in Hull, one of the worst affected cities by this rail strike. Now, the train station Hull-Paragon interchange is closed during these 3 days of strike action called by the RMT. And Anna joins us from there. Anna, what's the atmosphere like where you are? I understand that your part of the world, there aren't only rail strikes, there are also bus strikes as well.
Good afternoon, Liam. Yes, it's been a double whammy for commuters in Yorkshire. Like you say, there's the rail strikes going on across these 3 days, as well as the bus strikes that are happening. Where I'm standing now in Hull Paragon train station, it would normally be flooded with commuters coming past, going to the trains, but the gates, the locks on the gates and the signs behind me as well, warning people, do not travel. Now, there's been a picket line here as well with the RMT union members standing outside the train station this morning in solidarity for the strike. They were also joined by Carl Turner. He is the Hull East MP, and he stood in solidarity with the workers to support them in this strike.
Labour MP Carl Turner joining that picket line, as you say, Anna, in defiance of the ruling from his party leader, Keir Starmer. Anna Riley in Hull, thanks a lot for joining us, because I'm afraid we've got to move on now. We're taking a quick break from On the Money because the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson's defended the government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Johnson's in the capital, Kigali, for a Commonwealth Leaders Summit, and he's reiterated that, in his view, the policy does not break international law.
The British government's official policy on Rwanda is concerned about its human rights record, on restrictions on civil rights, political rights, media freedom. Why are you happy to send asylum seekers here?
This is a plan that I think is absolutely necessary and right to fix the problem of illegal cross-channel trafficking of people whose lives are being put at risk by the gangs. And you've got to break the business model of the gangs. It's totally the right thing to do. But I think what people need to understand, what the critics of the policy need to understand, and that I've seen loads and loads of criticism, is that Rwanda has undergone an absolute transformation in the last a couple of decades. And you've got the whole of the Commonwealth leaders here today in a city, in a capital city, Kigali, which is a very, very safe place. They've gone leaps and bounds in their progress in education, in taking the society forward. And what both countries have done, the UK and Rwanda, is an immense amount of due diligence on the way things work, both in the UK and in Rwanda, so that everything we do is in conformity with human rights, with everything that you would expect. I just had a great talk with Paul Kagame, the president, and he cares passionately about this. He's himself been a refugee for a long time. He knows what it's like. He sees the problem of people, vulnerable people, being trafficked across the channel and being trafficked around the world. He sees this as an opportunity to fix what is an increasing global problem by a partnership between the UK and Rwanda. And it's not just about migration. Actually, what you're going to, if you look at the role of the UK here in Rwanda, it's about education, it's about trade, it's about all sorts of things. It's about green technology, financial services, all sorts of areas where we want to do more together. So it's a partnership that's growing.
You're obviously here in Rwanda for Chogam, but specifically on the asylum policy, what is your message to those, and you call them critics? Critics have some real reservations about this policy.
I hear them, and I think, if I may be so, I just think what they're basing their criticisms on a perception, perhaps a stereotype of Rwanda that is now outdated. And they should come here, as the heads of the Commonwealth governments are coming here today, see the kind of progress that Rwanda has made. And believe me, we did a huge amount of due diligence on the legal processes, on the safety here in Rwanda, with the safety levels which are extremely high. And I think actually that is why the policy continues to, it has not been ruled unlawful in any UK court. Actually, it hasn't even been ruled unlawful in the Strasbourg court. And we're just going to keep going. And what I would just urge people is keep an open mind, look at Rwanda, look at the way it's changing, and think about the way that these two countries can work together to solve what is a very complex problem of illegal people trafficking, but to which there aren't many very, very simple solutions. This is a good solution, and we're going to pursue it.
You've called some of your critics condescending. Do you think that's what they are here? They're not giving Rwanda the fair deal?
I think that it's important to look at what Rwanda has achieved, and I think that it's important to just try to shift some of the stereotypes, look at the levels of safety, look at the parity in education between boys and girls, the immense progress that is being made, the safety and security that is being offered. And believe me, we spent absolutely months and months and months doing the due diligence.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson there, speaking from the Rwandan capital of Kigali, where he is for a Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit, defending his government's policy to send asylum seekers to the Central African nation. It's time now for my daily interview series, Money Talks, and we're about to meet Steve Freer and Val Vavrosh, two former prison officers who founded the employment agency Tempus Novo. They've got almost 60 years of combined experience working with offenders in prisons across the country. Steve and Val, they set up their company in 2014 to identify and place ex-offenders with leading employers, giving former convicts a chance to rebuild their lives. Determined to improve rehabilitation across the UK criminal justice system, Steve and Val have built strong relationships with ministers and officials at the Ministry of Justice and elsewhere across government. And over the last 8 years, they've successfully placed hundreds of former criminals in long-term civilian work. So here they are, Steve Freer and Val Vavrosh at Tempus Novo. They're my latest guests on Money Talks. Steve, it's great to have you here on Money Talks.
Just to be here.
Just outline what your charity is. What are you and Val and the rest of your team trying to achieve here?
So, having worked in prisons for almost 3 decades, you find there's a lot of people actually that society have let down and that they're in there really because they've had a poor start. You come across a lot of people like that. So we decided to look into why they're in and out of prison and what could possibly turn the heads to move away from crime. And it became clear that if we could find most of these people a good, sustainable job, then they'd move away from crime. And at the same time, we're lifting them out of poverty. So essentially, that's what drove us to set Tempus Novo up.
Now, Val, despite your obvious youth, the two of you have between you 60-odd years working in the prison service. What drove you to team up with Steve to create Tempus Novo?
I suppose talking to thousands and thousands of lads over the years, and usually that's the same faces coming back, getting out, coming back. And I'd said to them, you come into prison, you work hard in prison, you get on well with staff, you get on well with your peers. You go and work down a hot, sweaty kitchen on 12-hour shifts. You don't moan. You get up 6-7 days a week. Why can't you do that on the out? And the stock answer that were coming back was, have you ever tried getting a job with a record like mine, Val? And I'd say, well, actually, no. And then I'd actually witnessed them writing letters to 150, 200 companies. They'd write the letters, send them off, and not get one answer because they claim that they actually disclosed on the letter that they'd got criminal convictions. So they never even got an answer. So that's really what set this, what we decided. There's a big gap here because the prison service do the best, but they lump what they call ETE together, which is education, training and employment. They try the best with education, they do some training, but there's nothing done on employment. And after working in there for 30 years, it soon became quite obvious that that was a massive gap in that market. And that's what me and Steve decided to fill.
I think the sort of passion behind it as well is when you change someone's life who really you're lifting them out of the gutter. And they're so grateful that we found that this is working so well because they didn't ever expect to get this opportunity. And because they've got it, they turn into some of the most hardworking and loyal employees. And where business is concerned, yeah, there's an element of charity But bottom line is business, and you've got to make money, and you want hard workers. And we found that the majority of the people we were supporting filled that role well, and that's why we've been as successful as we have.
The prison system should be about punishment. It should be about retribution and deterring crime, but it should also be, shouldn't it, about rehabilitation?
Yeah.
Do you think we've underplayed rehabilitation, Steve, over recent years within the British criminal justice system?
Underplayed it?
Yeah.
No, I think there's been a drive actually to rehabilitate people, but it's a big machine as the criminal justice system. And to expect some big results quickly, no matter what changes you put in place, is unrealistic. I mean, I've seen several prisons ministers and justice secretaries banging the drum of rehabilitation. But you've got to, again, it's about being realistic. There's different types of prison. Val and I know that the open estate, known as the Category D prisons, is realistically the only prisons that you're going to achieve any level of rehabilitation with. Ministers are asking every prison to achieve what, in my opinion, are unworkable results. So the focus in the resources, I think, in the wrong areas.
Val, tell us about some of the examples you've witnessed over the years, both when you were working within the criminal justice system and now working with the charity Tempus Novo. There must be people on your mind, young men and indeed women, who have come out of prison and, having been given a chance, having been given employment, have really turned their lives around.
Oh, without a doubt. I've just been talking about one now. In fact, I've just rang one now. And it's a guy called Richard. He was...
How's this surrogate dad?
Yeah. He was the most prolific offender in Bradford. And when we told the police that we were... Because they want to know when he's being released, because they have crime spikes in that area. And we informed the police, because we're friends there, and we said, we're going to help this guy called Richard. And that straight away they said, are you mad? Are you absolutely mad?
What sort of crime are we talking about?
Acquisitive crime.
Yeah.
Burglary.
Car theft mainly, twacking.
So not physical violence?
No.
No.
Okay, but still crime nonetheless.
Yeah, on a big scale, on a biggish scale, sort of constantly at it and earning money. And so they said, you must be crazy. Well, I said, listen, I've spoke to him, I've been in prison, he's asked to see me. I said, he's convinced me. I said, so we're going to give him a go. Good luck with that one. I said, yeah, okay. 6 years later, I've just rung him now because he's somebody else is after interview.
Can't work. He says, I can't talk to you while I'm working.
He actually did. He said, I'm just building a unit. I'm just building this unit. He says, can I ring you back in an hour? I says, well, I need an answer off you quite quickly. But anyway, so Richard, the most prolific offender, 6 years he's been working. He actually rings me up and tells me he's passed his driving test. He says, I can now drive down through Bradford, he says, legally, and stick two fingers up at the police. He says, because I'm all legal. He says, for the first time ever in my life. But honestly, and it's like Steve says, I'm like his surrogate dad. He ain't got a dad as such. So he rings me and I said to him, I'm really proud of you, Richard. What an absolute achievement you've made. He now takes care of his family.
So what's he do now for a living?
He's a fitter. He's a ventilation, air conditioning fitter.
Decent job. Big demand for that.
Absolutely brilliant job. And not only that, he's worked his way up because he used to be a fitter's mate. He's now become the fitter. And he actually said to me, rang me up again a few weeks ago and said, I'm looking for a fitter's mate, he says, because now I need a fitter's mate. He says, and I've told my boss that I want to get somebody from Tempus Novo.
Okay.
He says, now
another former offender.
Yes. He says, now I want to help.
It must have been a leap of faith for you, though, Val, to put this guy in front of the employers that you work with.
Yeah.
And of course, your reputation with them is valuable. If your reputation's sullied, then that jeopardizes the chances for other people coming through, right?
It certainly does.
So you must have known you were taking a risk.
Mm-hmm.
What was it about this guy that made you think, yeah, I'm going to go for this one?
I think after 30 years of been having, there's hundreds and thousands of them trying to pull the wool over my eyes. You just know you get that gut feeling.
Well, that's a USP of Tempus Novo.
Yeah.
The fact that we've got so much experience
Yeah.
working in prisons without any shadow of a doubt.
Some people, with all respect, they are beyond employment. Would you accept that?
100%.
Without a doubt.
We know that there's, 80,000 people in
Yeah.
prison currently, 230,000 people in the community supervised by probation. Realistically,
10%, if that.
I'd say 5, because you've got, obviously, some people...
Well, you're saying 5 or 10% are beyond employment?
No.
Are
employable.
employable.
Are employable,
Okay.
yeah.
For various reasons. Some because of our model.
That's like finding needles in haystacks, isn't it?
is.
Sorry, but
But
that's
they find
tough.
us, because if they don't find us, we're doing it the wrong way around, because that's the first step of motivation to show that they want to change their lives. So they know where we are. They find us. We also get referrals from probation officers, police
So if you're
officers.
saying 280,000 people on probation, 80,000 prison population, we're talking 360,000 people. You're saying 10% of those are, in your view, with all respect to the others, employable.
As of today.
We're talking 30, 40,000 people who would otherwise be on the scrap heap that your charity, other retribution charities are trying to create a decent life or help them create a decent life
That's
for themselves.
And the savings involved are just staggering. It's £45,000 per year to keep someone in prison, national average. I think the last calculation was 2018 that the government did on reoffending, and it were £18.1 billion. Now, just by taking one offender off that cycle, the savings, and so you're reducing crime, there's less victims, safer streets, more people in employment. Don't forget they're now paying national insurance and tax.
Yeah.
It's a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer, say Steve Freer and Val Vavrosh, co-founders of Tempus Novo. And you can listen to the full 20-minute version of that interview now on my Money Talks podcast on the GB News YouTube channel or via the GB News app or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Just search for Money Talks. That's all we've got time for today, but I'm back tomorrow at 1 p.m. But for now, this is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On the Money.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. And have we got a bumper programme for you today? We are, of course, going to be discussing the second day of rail strikes. Yet again, the network has ground to a halt nationally. Is it justified? Also, we are going to be talking bowel cancer. Apparently, a half of all adults are not taking advantage of screenings in the UK. It's the second biggest cancer killer. We're going to be joined by Dr. Carol Sikora about that one. I'm also joined today by Patrick O'Flynn, a former colleague of mine at UKIP and an MEP for SDP, who campaigned tirelessly over Brexit. We are, of course, going to be discussing that as well, as it's the 23rd of June, so happy Independence Day. Brexit has officially turned 6 years old today. Have we made the most of it? All of that and a lot more to come, so do stay tuned. Remember, you can send us your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet the programme @GBNews. We are now going to go to the headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Railway passengers are facing more disruption over the summer, with another union planning to ballot staff next week for a further round of strikes. Tens of thousands of workers have walked off the job for the second time this week following a dispute over pay and conditions. More industrial action is planned for Saturday. Negotiations continue, but the RMT's Assistant General Secretary John Leach says the current offer needs to be improved.
I'm going in anticipation and hope that they're going to put a proper and decent offer on the table. But the thing is, let's talk about what is on the table. 2%, job insecurity, thousands of job cuts, ticket office closures, new contracts, fire and rehire. That's not on. They've got to have a complete reset. And more importantly, probably than anything else, the government have got to get behind the railway men and women of this country and resource and give the authority to the management to negotiate a fair deal.
Well, Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng says there is a fair offer on the table.
People who are striking, preventing kids from taking exams, preventing people from getting to work, should really actually look at what they're doing and actually, I think, come to some sort of reasonable arrangement. I don't think it's the case that the government has been unreasonable. I think the strikers are the ones who are being unreasonable.
The Prime Minister is urging people to keep an open mind about the government's plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. In the country's capital for the Commonwealth Leaders Summit, Boris Johnson said critics need to understand the government has done a huge amount of due diligence. Ahead of his meeting with Prince Charles, who reportedly described the policy as appalling, the Prime Minister defended the plan.
We did a huge amount of due diligence on the legal processes, on the safety here in Rwanda, with the safety levels which are extremely high. And I think actually that is why the policy continues to, it has not been ruled unlawful in any UK court. Actually, it hasn't even been ruled unlawful in the Strasbourg court. And we're just going to keep going. And what I would just urge people is keep an open mind.
2 people have been charged with conspiring to arrange the travel of a child into the UK to harvest organs. A 60-year-old man and a 55-year-old woman, both from Nigeria, have been remanded in custody. They're due to appear at Uxbridge Magistrates Court. The child has been taken into care. The Ministry of Defence has confirmed the name of a soldier who was killed during a training exercise on Salisbury Plain. Second Lieutenant Max George of 5th Battalion, the Rifles, suffered serious head injuries after being involved in a collision with a Warrior armoured vehicle on Tuesday. His death is being investigated by police. The Met Police is being re-investigated over the way it handled its inquiry into serial killer Stephen Port's victims. Port murdered 4 young men in Barking, East London, and is serving a whole life sentence. A 2021 inquest found police failures probably contributed to the deaths of 3 of his victims. Scotland Yard has acknowledged the failings and says it will support the new inquiry. Afghan authorities are still struggling to reach a remote area after yesterday's earthquake, which killed at least 1,000 people. 1,500 others were injured as the 6.1 magnitude quake struck, destroying homes in the eastern part of the country. It's the deadliest earthquake to hit Afghanistan in 2 decades. The United Nations is calling for financial aid, urging world leaders to provide humanitarian support. And the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have posed for their first official joint portrait. It's on display at the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge and will open to the public. Painted by award-winning portrait artist Jamie Corrith, it was commissioned last year as a gift for the people of Cambridgeshire. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Alex with We Need to Talk About.
Well, it's the second day of industrial action by rail workers this week after talks collapsed, with only 1 in 5 trains currently running in the UK. Meanwhile, government's proposals to allow companies to draft in agency workers to plug gaps left by striking staff have also gone a bit off the rails, with many agencies saying they don't want to be dragged into the fray, while others criticise the plans for only prolonging disruption and potentially making services less safe. Firebrand RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch has opened both barrels on Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, arguing that where Westminster doesn't control the network, deals have largely been done. But is the minister right not to capitulate, with threats from other unions representing teachers, barristers and nurses also agitating over pay rights this summer? Well, the Prime Minister, who's in Rwanda for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, has been speaking about the railway strikes. He was asked if he had a message for the strikers.
I just think that it's important to remember that these strikes are unnecessary. I think people should get round the table and sort it out. Look at the rail strikes in particular, which is the thing that has been really bugging me. I want a great future for railways. This is a government that is investing more in railways than any previous government in the last 50 years. Look at HS2, the integrated rail plan, another 96 billion. We've just completed Crossrail in London. We want to build a Northern Powerhouse rail. We're doing incredible things. But to have a great future for rail and for railway workers and their families, you've got to have some sensible reforms. And that is things like reforming ticket offices. I did a huge amount of that when I was running London. It's things like walking time, which I'm sure you know about. It's stuff that maybe the union barons are more attached to, perhaps than their workforce. I want us to work together with the railway staff for a better future for the railway, and I think the strikes are a terrible idea.
Well, our GB News reporters have been out and about today and they're live across the country. So let's go first to Euston Station and Rosie Wright. Rosie, what's the situation like there?
Very good afternoon to you, Alex. Well, yes, Euston Station quite critical because the headquarters of the RMT are here. And this morning, the RMT were locked in a room behind me talking to National Rail. Now, they came out at about lunchtime. RMT are now currently in negotiations with train companies. We don't know the details of those negotiations. The people behind me, RMT, all of us who are looking to get back out on the trains and to have a regular service will be desperate to know what was said around that table. As soon as we get a glimpse, we'll bring it to you here. The people behind me on the picket line are determined. They're in support of the strikes, clearly, or they wouldn't be here. And they say, this is about our pay. I spoke to one gentleman who's a caterer who said, look, I don't even earn $30,000 a year. I haven't had a pay rise for the last 3, and it looks like I'm not going to get one for the next 3 years to come. We are determined, they say. We're not going to beg for a pay rise. We are negotiating for one, and that means we will strike. If there is no movement around those talks, then what we've seen today, as we did see on Tuesday, will come around again for the 3rd time on Saturday. Up until now, it looks like that's still going ahead. Let me give you the other flip side, though, what's happening inside the station. Currently, we're running about 4 to 6 trains an hour. And while the people here behind me say we want to fight for our pay and so there aren't job cuts, some people inside the station are saying, well, I can't get to my job because of your strikes. I met one gentleman called Tim when I arrived here first thing this morning at about 5 o'clock. Well, he'd been sleeping outside because the traffic was so bad yesterday because of disruption. He arrived too late to get his train, got here at 6:30. Tough. Your next train's going to be tomorrow morning at 8:30. He arrived then almost 12 hours late for the job he was employed to do today. So this really is a story of people saying we're not going to budge and everybody else in the meantime, lots of people saying we're in support of strikes, but could you just not strike right now? People saying you're massively disrupting my lives. The RMT are resolute. By the end of the day, they'll keep negotiating. They used a similar term to Brexit. They said we'll just keep negotiating until it's done. When we get more, we'll bring it to you here.
Rosie, thank you. What kipping outside the station, that's commitment to a job, and we're pleased you're committed to yours too. Well, our North Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley is in Hull. What's the picture like there, Anna?
Good afternoon, Alex. Well, Hull has been one of the worst affected cities by this 3-day strike action, with no trains running here from the station where I'm stood. There would normally be commuters, passengers coming and going for the rail network that run out from here, which is Hull Trains, Transpennine Express and Northern Rail. But there's no passengers because the trains are just not running. There's also been the RMT union here this morning, standing at the picket line for this strike, and they were joined by local MP for Hull East, Carl Turner. I caught up with him about what he thinks to the strike action, and this is what he had to say.
Starmer is doing is saying to Grant Shapps and the Prime Minister, get round the table, unshackle the shackles that you've put on the management. I speak with Mick Lynch regularly. Mick Lynch tells me that the management are desperate to do a deal, but actually they're being instructed by the government not to settle this dispute. Now, that isn't a reasonable way of carrying on. People are going to be inconvenienced. People going to medical appointments, NHS appointments missed, people missing very, very important appointments that are going to affect their lives personally.
Carl Turner there saying that the government needs to do something to put an end to these strikes. I also spoke to RMT member Gaz Jackson earlier, and he said that the RMT were prepared to go beyond these 3 days of strike action until they get those pay and conditions that they are asking for. And as we have more updates, we'll bring them to you, Alex.
Anna, thank you so much. We can now speak to Paul Hawkins, who's at Waterloo Station in London. Paul.
Yeah, hi Alex. Frankly, it's a little bit like it is elsewhere around the country when it comes to mainline stations. It's really, really quiet here. I reckon there's probably as many pigeons in the station as there are people. They're getting the message, they're working from home it seems, and some of the data we've been getting this afternoon bears that out. This is from the first day of strikes, bear in mind, when there was a tube strike on in London as well as a national rail strike. But the broadband provider Virgin Media O2 says it recorded an increase in usage of up to 10% on Tuesday, and it said that indicated that millions more people are working from home this week. In terms of traffic in the capital, that is up slightly, 8% week on week, according to the location services firm TomTom. So people, it seems, are getting the message. Not many are coming into London. Those that are today, unlike Tuesday, jumping on the tube, getting in their cars or by bus. Well, I was going to say by cycle, although it does seem, just anecdotally, that looking at the huge cycle rack outside Waterloo Station, a lot of the bikes are still in their racks, so I don't think a lot of people are travelling by bicycle across the capital. Be interesting to see how those people feel who are going to walk back to the station or walk home later on, given that there is a thunderstorm forecast for the capital and for the south of England. But at the moment, very quiet here. Interesting to see, by the way, how Labour responds to that news that the government announced earlier today, that it's going to try and fill in the holes in rail strikes, the holes in staffing with agency workers. The Labour Party, of course, been sitting on the fence when it comes to whether they're going to support or condemn the strikes. Keir Starmer saying that he isn't going to go either way on the strikes, but telling his shadow cabinet ministers not to go out and support the strikes. Of course, lots of them were out on the picket lines, so it'll be interesting to see whether he supports that legislation, which the government says is going to bring before the Commons very shortly and could be in place as soon as July.
Paul, thank you. Thank you to Rosie as well, and to Anna up in Hull. Thank you ever so much, team. Great reporting. Well, from our grid of great British gridlock to the GB News studio, I am joined today by political commentator and columnist Patrick O'Flynn. Well, the rail unions wanted to cause maximum disruption, but one could argue that in the new normal of post-pandemic working habits, maybe it's not upsetting as many people as they would hope.
I think it is causing severe disruption to millions, and that's what strikes are meant to do. That's part of the leverage. And I'm not particularly buying the government's depiction of the RMT as the sort of reincarnation of Arthur Scargill. The union is doing what its job is as a trade union, which is to try and get a bigger slice of the national cake for its own members. And we're looking at inflation of pushing 10%. I initially heard they were looking for an 11% pay rise. Now I'm reading 7%, which is actually under the rate of inflation. The question is, rather than the moral condemnation from cabinet ministers, is should the RMT be able to lock down tens of billions of pounds worth of infrastructure that taxpayers have paid for in order to secure themselves a preferential pay deal? Now, if the government thinks that's wrong, and on balance, I think it's wrong, don't whinge about it. Come up with a plan to defeat the strike. And it's absurd that the government's been sitting on this legislation for 2 years or more to give the rail operators a duty to carry on with some form of skeleton service, which facilitates bringing in agency workers. And they've waited till after the strike has been organised and started. If this was Margaret Thatcher, thinking back to the miners' dispute, she built up the stockpiles of coal. She intricately prepared for what she knew would be a great tussle to come. This government doesn't seem to have prepared at all. And you see this again in the Rwanda plan. If it takes a British Bill of Rights to facilitate the Rwanda plan, then do that first. Get your ducks in a row before you launch a position which you can't sustain. So I've personally heard enough of Arthur Scargill and all this reheated 70s and 80s stuff. And I'm looking for a government that's actually competent and has got a plan to deliver this modernisation of working practices. And I'm afraid now to teach a powerful union a lesson, because if they get 7% pay rise, they will set off the teachers, people in healthcare, other highly unionised sectors, and then everyone will panic that inflation is going to carry on being 8, 10, 12%. 1 or 2 years ahead, and there'll be a stampede over pay rises and industrial chaos. So I see it as a competence issue for the government.
Patrick, yeah, interesting thoughts. Thank you so much. I also want to know your views. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews so I know what you really think. You're with GB News on TV and DAB Radio. Coming up, with the rail network paralysed by industrial action, we'll debate the rights and wrongs of the strikes with former newspaper editor Kelvin Mackenzie. Time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A hot one for some today. Downpours in other places. Hit and miss thunderstorms developing through the day today, particularly across England and Wales. Weather front up to the far north, but it's actually this one approaching from France that's bringing more clouds and some heavy showers. We've already seen a few, but we're going to see more of them developing this afternoon as the heat really gets going, particularly over parts of the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast initially, but spreading into Wales and then later on into northern England. Southwest England also susceptible to some heavy downpours. Hit and miss, so not everywhere seeing them, far from it, but where they do occur, torrential rain, large hail likely. The highest temperatures today across northern England, North Wales, could get close to 30 Celsius. Mostly dry for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Quite a bit of cloud here, but some sunny spells coming through. And then through the evening, the chance of those thundery showers working further north. So we'll see more of them this evening over northern England, spreading into parts of Scotland. Some heavy rain likely here through the night. So the downpours further south tending to ease. Quite a warm, quite a humid night. Quite a lot of cloud around as well, but misty in places. And generally a cloudier day on Friday with a continued risk of some showers. The overnight ones clearing away from northern Scotland, but we'll see more developing I think, during tomorrow, particularly over the Midlands, southwest England, but also moving up into northeast England during the afternoon. Again, not everywhere seeing the downpours, but there will be some heavy ones around, the risk of hail and thunder. In the sunny spells, mid-20s across the east, but turning cooler further west with more persistent rain for Northern Ireland, moving in by the end of Friday. Wales and southwest England seeing some heavy rain for a time late on Friday as well. And that line of rain is a cold front which swings across all areas, tied into this area of low pressure, which will bring plenty of showers in western areas this weekend and a much cooler feel, with particularly across Northern Ireland, some gusty winds.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping it.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, whether you're for these strikes or against them tends to fall along voting divides, and whether you regard unions as bastions of progress or pugnacious, greedy disruptors pushing for privileges people in private sectors aren't always afforded. And these railway strikes are no different. It may also depend on how much your plans have been mucked up by the industrial action. But post-pandemic, with working from home part of the so-called new normal, a lot of people may welcome an excuse to do their job from their couch. But there's also a lot of misinformation out there on everything from how much rail workers are actually paid, whether they're demanding top-ups to walk mere minutes to the mess room, whether they will face compulsory redundancies or not for binning staff at ticket offices that allegedly sell just one ticket an hour. Are you confused about whose side you should be on? Well, let's chew it over. Let's debate the rights and wrongs of the strike with former editor of the Sun newspaper, Kelvin Mackenzie, and former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Kelvin, I'm going to come to you first. Are you blowing off steam from your ears every time you hear the strikes and the picket lines, or are you sympathetic to what they're asking for?
I'm not particularly sympathetic to what they asked for. And as far as I can see, their strike is having virtually no effect. I mean, it's quite interesting that the time it's taking. So somebody I know very well, driving from where I live in Weybridge to North London, took an hour and a half this morning, which is exactly the same time as they would take any other day, whether there was a strike or not. It's now clear that 91%, I saw the numbers this morning, 91% of the office staff are all working from home. And I don't know how much work they did in the office, but most jobs can be done on a computer now for the white-collar worker. And I don't believe that this is having the effect that the RMT intended. My suggestion, my sense is, having looked around at it, that they will be very grateful for a deal which says, actually, loads of people can leave the railway industry, and in return, we will carry out some new ideas, which should have been ideas that should have been introduced 30-odd years ago. And when people talk about the right to strike, what about the right to people to go to hospital, the right to be educated, the right actually to make your way to work if you're not lucky enough to be an office worker? These are all other rights which seem to get dumped by the lefties as soon as they say, actually, we're slightly short of money, or we don't want to be promoted, or we don't want to do extra hours, or we don't want to work on a Sunday. The idea that these are upstanding citizens flogging themselves to death for the greater cause of society is patently absurd.
Kelvin, thank you. Do not go anywhere, because first I'm going to speak with former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Great to have you in the studio for once. Managed to get here despite all of the strikes. Now, what's interesting, I mean, Kelvin talking about the right to strike and how this has disrupted people's lives, but on the same hand saying, well, perhaps it's not having the impact that they hoped it would, because a lot of people are used to working from home. Does that mean we're probably going to see a prolonged period of industrial action, or will the unions capitulate?
Well, I don't think the unions will capitulate, because the principle of trade union solidarity is you stand with your comrades. And to me, that's a positive thing as a trade unionist myself. But I was delighted Kelvin started off using quite moderate language. Cast your minds back a week, we heard some right-wing commentators, many government ministers, talking about Britain grinding to a halt, Britain coming to a standstill. If, in fact, people are still getting to work, evidently there is some disruption, it's a positive. And then that shows that Britain can keep functioning, but trade unionists can, in reasonable language, take reasonable industrial action in terms of a reasonable pay offer. Maybe some of the kind of hysteria around this debate has been ameliorated. And as Kelvin said, and I think as we all recognise, COVID has changed how we go to work. One stat I read for day one of the strike, 250,000 people couldn't get into work. The entire UK workforce, 33 million. So it's disruption, but on a relatively small scale.
Yeah, going back to you, Kelvin, what's interesting to me is that Labour seems somewhat ashamed of this strike action, initially ordering their MPs not to join the picket lines, but that's the party that was built up by unions, essentially. What's going on there?
Well, I don't think they know whether they're Arthur or Martha, do they? Let's be honest about it. What they fear is that what they want to do is they all want to go out on the picket line. They want to be standing there with the old brazier on there, hoping that people give them a toot on their car as they walk by. But what Starmer fears is that the ordinary member of the public, even if it was only 250,000, were made uncomfortable on this day about their working practices or their hospitals or their education or any aspect, visiting their old granddad, you know? It doesn't matter. They were disrupted. They fear that they may lose those voters. And so Starmer's decided to sit on his hands until he felt the piles begin to bleed slightly. And so I'm afraid that it won't have been a good dispute for him. But I suspect no dispute's any good for him, because in the end of the day, he's a lawyer, and so he would take the next cab off the rank, whether it would be Hitler or whether it would be Mother Teresa.
Kelvin, I love your way of words. I really do. It's been a brilliant little section having you on the programme today. Do come and entertain us all again in the future. Well, going back to you guys here, I mean, Patrick, would you be tooting from your car as you went past the picket line? Because you did seem to suggest earlier that, well, you know, strikes are strikes, and that's what unions are supposed to be doing.
Well, unions are there to, you know, fight for the paying conditions of their particular segment of the workforce. But no, I wouldn't be tooting, although if I was the picket line, I wouldn't really place too much store in getting a toot. It's the sort of easy Mr. Popular signal for someone driving past. I reckon half the people tooting, if they sat down and thought about it, wouldn't have done so. And I disagree really with Peter about saying that it's great that there's a strike and yet it's not having much of a disruptive impact, and that's good for everyone. If you're the RMT, you need this strike to kind of grind a big section of the economy to a halt, because you need to show your leverage, which you will then try and monetize in a bigger pay settlement. So I think, privately, the RMT would be quite depressed at that assessment that they're all going on strike and it's not having very much effect. But equally, I do think the government should have had a plan, and it's no good just condemning workers who want to have more money. Most of us want to have more money, and they're attempting to shut down this infrastructure that we've all paid for. If that's wrong, and I think on balance it's wrong, they should have a plan to get agency workers in and to break the strike. And that would send a signal right across the public sector that, high pay rises are not on the agenda this year.
I mean, it's not only about pay rises, though, is it? And there's been a lot of stuff out there that I don't know what to believe and what not to believe. This idea that they want extra money for their breaks to walk to the mess room, that the question over whether the redundancies that will come from shutting down things like ticket offices are going to be voluntary or compulsory. Where do you see where the truth lies in this?
Well, it is actually a very complex dispute, and I felt Kelvin Mackenzie's nonsense was quite offensive. Let's not bring Hitler into everything. That's the last thing we need in British politics. In terms of dispute now, so we've got around 9 or 10 train operating companies, and Boris Johnson, when he was Mayor of London, cut ticket offices. To me, as someone who lives in London, that was a seriously detrimental effect, and there is a bit of a safety element, especially around people travelling late at night. In terms of what's going to happen next, in terms of the pay negotiation, unions have said Network Rail wants to cut around 2,000 jobs, and it has safety concerns over that. And the people that run the railways point to fewer travellers because of COVID. But whether your train is 100% full or 50, and we're at about 75% capacity at the moment, you still want your train to be entirely safe. You don't want your train to be only 75% safe. So the idea that you cut back on safety and maintenance is a worry. I think there is a series, you alluded to, other smaller, very piecemeal disputes over working conditions. Way too much detail to go into now. But actually, I think that's where you actually have a role for government in trying to steward this towards a solution and a negotiated agreement. And bear in mind, Grant Shapps last week calling rail workers selfish, calling a trade union leader a liar this week. That's not navigating the way through the problems you're describing, is it? It's just insulting people for political gain.
Peter, thank you so much, and thank you for joining us in the studio against the odds, despite all of the disruption. Which
the journey was fine.
I'm glad to hear it. Patrick will be catching up with you again on this in the second hour. And you can let me know your views. Are you on Peter's side, Patrick's side, Kelvin's side, your own side? Do let me know. gbviews@gbnews.uk. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up, polio has returned to the UK 2 decades after it was eradicated here. Do we need to be worried? Now, though, let's check on the news headlines.
It's 2:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Railway passengers are facing more disruption over the summer, with another union planning to ballot staff next week over potential strikes. Tens of thousands of workers have walked off the job for the second time this week following a dispute over pay and conditions. More industrial action is planned for Saturday. The Prime Minister is urging people to keep an open mind about the government's plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. In the country's capital for the Commonwealth Leaders Summit, Boris Johnson said critics need to understand there's been a huge amount of due diligence. He defended the plan ahead of his meeting with Prince Charles, who reportedly described the policy as appalling. 2 people have been charged with conspiring to arrange the travel of a child into the UK to harvest organs. A 6-year-old man and 55-year-old woman, both from Nigeria, have been remanded in custody. They're due to appear at Uxbridge Magistrates Court. The child has been taken into care. The Ministry of Defence has confirmed 2nd Lieutenant Max George of 5th Battalion, the Rifles, was killed during a training exercise on Salisbury Plain. He suffered serious head injuries after being involved in a collision with a Warrior armoured vehicle on Tuesday. His death is being investigated by police. The Met Police is being re-investigated over the way it handled its inquiry into serial killer Stephen Port's victims. It follows a 2021 inquest which found police failures probably contributed to the deaths of 3 of the 4 men. Scotland Yard has acknowledged the failings and says it will support the new inquiry. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Alex with We Need to Talk About. We'll be back in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Polio, a horrible disease that had been eliminated in the UK and most parts of the world through one of the most successful vaccine programmes in history. But apparently it's back, having been detected in a London sewage plant. Should we be afraid, and why is it here? Well, first off, most people are still vaccinated against polio in the UK. But with childhood immunisation programmes disrupted by the pandemic internationally, where the world recorded only a few dozen polio cases across 4 countries 5 years ago, that number increased to more than 1,000 known cases across nearly 30 countries. Yet this strain is suspected to have derived from someone who recently had the all vaccine, which is then mutated. Meanwhile, new figures show that in some parts of the country, mainly in London, 50% of teens have not actually been jabbed. So could we be at risk of polio taking hold? What is going on? Joining me now to talk about this is Professor Andrew Preston, who's a microbiologist at the University of Bath. Fantastic to have you back on, Andrew. Not talking about COVID for once, but polio. Should we be worried?
Yes and no. Clearly, polio, as you said, is a terrible, terrible disease. And we thought we had it fully eradicated. So to find any trace of it back on these shores is a cause for concern. But as you also pointed out, this is not really sort of the endemic wild polio that we see remaining in a couple of areas of the world. As you pointed out, this is very likely to have derived from someone who's brought the vaccine strain with them after being vaccinated themselves and excreted it into the environment. But I guess the real concern is that this was detected in several samples over a period of months. And it's very, very unlikely that that is a result of a single person carrying this. And so if it's multiple people, that does suggest that this vaccine-derived polio virus is transmitting between people in that London area, and that is a cause for concern.
So how does that work? Because I'm trying to wrap my head around having a vaccine, and then that vaccine, the live virus in that vaccine, manages to get into the waterworks through someone's toilet and then has the possibility of infecting people.
So it's unlikely that the infection of those other people has derived from the wastewater in which the virus has been detected. It's just that we monitor wastewater for a variety of different things, so pollutants, chemicals, and indeed some pathogens, and that's really expanded during COVID. It was a highly sensitive sentinel for sort of where COVID was and its relative levels. So it's very much more likely that if this is being transmitted amongst people, it's the classic fecal oral route. So whoever's got it is able to maintain that live virus for a period of time. They excrete it into their environment. And as we see with many other diarrheal diseases, it's not that difficult for people to then become contaminated with it from their environment. So it's not as if it's spreading through the wastewater. That is just the sentinel to show that it is happening.
Now, most of the UK would have been vaccinated against polio during their childhood, but statistics, they're showing that in some London boroughs, 50% of young people have not been vaccinated. Could that create a pathway, essentially, to the spread of infection and put those people at serious risk?
I think that 50% is probably referring to the teenage booster vaccine. We know that the levels of vaccination at childhood, so the polio vaccine is administered as part of what is now a hexavalent, so a 6-in-1 vaccine at the ages of 2, 3, 4 months, and was also part of the preschool booster at around 3 years and 4 months of age. There is a teenage booster of 4 different vaccines. We do see less uptake of that, but the real susceptibles, the very young, we know that the vaccination levels across the country for those initial childhood vaccines is up around 92%, but across London it is worryingly low at 86%, and that is below the level at which we would expect to see sort of that herd immunity protection.
Andrew Preston, thank you so much, and we'll keep you updated on this situation and catch up with you again in the future, I hope. Well, Patrick, what are your thoughts on this? It's quite complex, because when I first read the story, the first thing I thought was there are a couple of countries in the world where the polio vaccination has essentially been barred, countries where the Taliban operates as it happens. But this is slightly different. It seems to be someone who has been vaccinated and somehow it's released the live virus through their digestive tract into the surrounding environs. It's quite worrying.
It is, and I think that's just the leading theory. I don't think they've ruled out the idea that it could be someone who's come in, from one of those countries where the Taliban operates and its immediate neighbour. And I think there's also another Central African country where, until relatively recently, polio was endemic. What it makes me worry about is, through political correctness, are we sloppy about health checks for people coming into our country from other countries? Because we've had TB really as a resurgent disease, particularly in our big cities, over the last 15 years or so. And I was reading a statistic this morning from the latest set of government statistics that suggested more than 70% of cases have occurred in people from outside the UK, who were born outside the UK. Now, I don't want to get too hardball about this, but I would suspect that we could be doing more, and I think other countries do more, to screen for these diseases before people come into the country. The idea of polio really becoming resurgent, hopefully it's not going to happen, is fairly terrifying. And there are particularly minority communities where the coverage of the vaccine doesn't seem to be at the levels we would want it to be. So ultimately, there must be a risk of children getting this really terrible, debilitating disease, which can leave them with kind of lifelong paralysis of limbs. Let's hope the authorities have got a handle on it, but I would personally like to see much more stringent screening for infectious diseases, which we thought we'd eradicated in our country, to stop them coming in again.
Yeah, Patrick, thank you. Well, now, a pregnant American woman who travelled to Malta on holiday with her partner has found herself in a devastating situation after developing complications. Andrea Prudenti, who's 16 weeks pregnant, has been experiencing blood loss, and doctors have said her pregnancy is no longer viable. But due to Malta's strict anti-abortion laws, Andrea has been denied a termination. The couple are now hoping to fly to the UK for the procedure. Well, we're now joined by Andrea Prudenti's partner, Jay Wheeldryer. Jay, I mean, this sounds like a devastating predicament for you both. First of all, you know, commiserations on the loss of your child, but how worrying for you as well for the health of your partner.
Yeah, it's been a pretty terrifying experience.
And were you surprised, I mean, when you were in Malta and realised that you tragically needed to seek out a termination, that it's not available there?
100% surprised. We expected that Malta, as part of the EU, had a medical system that would be in conformance with most of the EU and the United States. The thought that we couldn't get proper medical care never crossed our mind.
And what sort of things did medical staff say to you, that it's strictly prohibited, even on grounds of medical necessity?
Yeah, they weren't that direct. I think that partially the laws are so strict that I think that the medical professionals are even limited in how much they can communicate around abortion. So the communication came through in more subtle terms, and it took us a couple of days of research and learning to figure out why they weren't saying what they weren't saying.
And what is... expand upon that. What is it that sort of that you've gleaned from all of this in terms of, is it a cultural Roman Catholic perhaps practice in Malta that is part of their legal system?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, my suspicion is that that's part of it. I think that it strikes me as a really conservative culture and very much Catholic. I don't really know enough about cultures in the Mediterranean. Perhaps they've got something in common with, other old conservative cultures, maybe like the Greeks or the Italians. I'm speculating here, I don't know. But the sense that I have is that the traditional belief here is that women and mothers are supposed to sacrifice for their children. These are messages that I've heard, that it's normal for women to sacrifice for their children. And they have a deep anchoring that heartbeat is equal to life. And so anything that's going to interfere with the heartbeat is interfering with and terminating a life. And in this case, it becomes a real challenge because you're dealing with what is essentially a miscarriage or a birth that's gone 85% or 90% of the way. And there's no possible way that the child can survive. And there's also no possible way that the pregnancy can continue. And the only possibility is that by allowing the pregnancy to not terminate, you're exposing the mother to ongoing risk of infection that could be fatal, and there's nothing that the medical industry could do or that any professional could do to stop it if it sets.
So what is the plan now for you and Andrea? I understand you're going to try and come to the UK to get that treatment.
That was the original plan. The UK, it turns out, flying, unfortunately, given her current condition, the risk of hemorrhage and bleeding to death is significant. So every minute that you're not in a hospital is extraordinarily dangerous. The UK is a preferred destination because the healthcare system there is wonderful. Our insurance company has a presence in London. Apparently, the chief medical officer has associates in hospitals there. So that was the plan. But we're having to be redirected to a different destination that has a much shorter flight.
Do you mind me asking where you are heading off to?
Yeah, I actually got a call from insurance saying that we can't disclose it because the destination is already saying they're really concerned about protests and about pro-life activists interfering with the arrival at the airport and potentially interfering at the hospital.
Wow, gosh, I mean, that is shocking. My thoughts are with you. It sounds like a really terrifying and traumatic situation at the same time. Thank you so much for coming on the programme today and talking about it.
Thank you.
Well, coming up after the break, it's my unique take on the news headlines. It will be time for the Alex Agenda, but first, let's have a look at the weather forecast.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A hot one for some today. Downpours in other places. Hit and miss thunderstorms developing through the day today, particularly across England and Wales. Weather front up to the far north, but it's actually this one approaching from France that's bringing more clouds and some heavy showers. We've already seen a few, but we're going to see more of them developing this afternoon as the heat really gets going, particularly over parts of the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast initially, but spreading into Wales and then later on into northern England. Southwest England also susceptible to some heavy downpours. Hit and miss, so not everywhere seeing them, far from it, but where they do occur, torrential rain, large hail likely. The highest temperatures today across northern England, North Wales, could get close to 30 Celsius. Mostly dry for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Quite a bit of cloud here, but some sunny spells coming through. And then through the evening, the chance of those thundery showers working further north. So we'll see more of them this evening over northern England, spreading into parts of Scotland. Some heavy rain likely here through the night. The downpours further south tending to ease. Quite a warm, quite a humid night. Quite a lot of cloud around as well, but misty in places. And generally a cloudier day on Friday with a continued risk of some showers. The overnight ones clearing away from northern Scotland, but we'll see more developing, I think, during tomorrow, particularly over the Midlands, southwest England, but also moving up into northeast England during the afternoon. Again, not everywhere seeing the downpours, but there will be some heavy ones around, the risk of hail and thunder. In the sunny spells, mid-20s across the east, but turning cooler further west with more persistent rain for Northern Ireland.